The agenda this week explored how the global village is changing our view of democracy, examined the picture of ourselves our online searches are painting, and priced the rising costs of provincial policing. The Agenda's Week in Review begins with 2 decades of genetically modified foods. Watch.
I think there has to be an acknowledgement that genetic engineering is a truly novel technology. And it does allow us the possibility, and Mark alluded to that, of all kinds of traits that we could have never dreamt of before in crops and perhaps animals in the future as well. And so I think that recognition is important. And it,
when you say novel, do you mean novel good?
Novel. I mean, it allows us an endless possibility of what's possible. And you know, our government, for example, Government of Canada, has taken a plants with novel traits approach because they want to be able to capture all of those novel traits. But their concern is the trait, and so they recognize that, for example, producing large molecule pharmaceuticals in plants might be a good idea. It may not be a good idea in food or feed plants, for example, but that's possible only through genetic engineering, and that wasn't possible 20 years ago. So that's a good thing, but maybe we do that in tobacco plants, which never are part of the food or feed stream. I think we have to recognize the novelty of the technology, and I think our government regulators do through that process, in that they want to capture everything. And to Mark's point, they want to capture the possibility of those traits through any means. But nonetheless, GE is a very special technology in that regard.
We have not yet heard from Ted on the issue of, I'm not sure you've read all 1,000 of those studies that Mark just referred to that were on that scientist's website, but you do know your own experience of farming up in Bruce County. And what does your own experience tell you about the science on all of this?
Well, I tried to answer this for myself just yesterday in preparation because the science is bewildering for a non-scientist. There's a very eminent body of scientists called the Royal Society of Canada here in this country. And in 2000, in about 2000, the year 2000, Canadian Food Inspection Agency, Health Canada, and Environment Canada asked them to do a review on the future of biotechnologies in food. I read a good piece of that report, and it's a scathing condemnation of the lack of testing. The problem, as I started to...
14 years ago, though, wasn't it?
It was.
Is there anything more recent you've come across?
But nothing was, there was no follow-up on that study. What the Royal Society recommended to the government is that GM technologies no longer be allowed this carte blanche insider entry into the food market by the use of the word substantial equivalence. What that really was...
If you're going to read outdated science, so what do you expect? I mean, you go to the Royal Society of the UK, to the World Health Organization, to the AAAS in the United States. I mean, there are a lot of reputable scientific institutions you could have gone to who'd give you information which is updated to the last year or two, which would tell you very clearly there's a strong scientific consensus on the safety here. I mean, that would be much easier than having to wade through all of this stuff from primary resources.
Well, anybody who's not a scientist, I think, should read that report, because it really does point to the need for transparent, independent research, which has not been done. Actual research that tests the effectiveness of these foods and what the outcomes are.
It has been done, which is why I just pointed you to hundreds of scientific studies which have done this. So
it hasn't been done.
It's out there if you want to go and find it, and you don't look at stuff which is 15 years old, then you'll have a better idea of what's out there. And it is there, and you can read all this in the primary literature in peer-reviewed publications. And you know, it'll take a lot of time because there's lots of crops, lots of different traits, and there's a lot of scientific groups working on this. But the information is there if you want to go and find it.
Mark, do we know if any GM products have ever been taken off the shelf of a grocery store?
What, due to safety concerns?
Yes.
Not to my knowledge, no. The one example I could cite is, I think, this was at least 10 years ago. I think there was a Brazil nut gene which was put into some crop. And it did turn out to have an allergenic potential, and that was picked up during the testing and was never commercialized. So it's certainly possible you could create an unsafe GMO by taking an unsafe gene from a different organism and putting it into a crop plant. So I entirely accept that there needs to be. Okay.
Lucy, go ahead.
There have been unapproved GM crops that have made it into our food system. For example, Starlink corn. There is this problem where actually contamination is meaning that field
but that's
tests
not
of
the same as saying they're
experimental
unsafe.
crops.
I mean, there was no evidence of any safety, actual demonstrated safety issues.
Yeah, absolutely. We like to depend on our regulatory agencies to tell us if products are safe or not. And the issue that Ted raised of the Royal Society of Canada's report is really important because that report was in 2001 and recommended extensive changes to Canada's regulatory agencies, and that never happened. None of those changes happened.
Raw milk is defined as fluid milk obtained from an animal, for example, a cow or a doe, which is a female goat, or a ewe, a female sheep, that has not undergone any heat treatment. How long has this been going on? Since 1938. Ontario law has prohibited the sale of raw, that is to say, unpasteurized or unsterilized milk for human consumption since 1938. Premier Mitch Hepburn did it, actually. So here's the first question. Why is it that way?
Because generally, we consider raw milk to be unsafe. So if you go back to the illnesses that led to the ban of raw milk, there were things like tuberculosis and Q fever. And then there were a second generation of pathogens emerging in the 70s, 80s. We became more concerned about Salmonella and E. coli and then Listeria. So a long list of Latin names that have been emerging over the years and continuing to emphasize that raw milk is an inherently unsafe product.
Do you agree with that? It's inherently unsafe?
I do agree with that. Although it's important, that like any food product, that we evaluate raw milk with an appropriate set of, we would call it risk analysis, do a proper risk assessment. And I would say that risk assessment has been done, but the issue is still there, because like really any risk question, it's never 100%, one side or the other. And so, the arguments in favor of raw milk, first of all, tend to downplay the risks, and so we can have a long conversation about the true value of the risks, and if you emphasize the benefits, with all types of risks, we tend to underestimate the risks if we perceive particular benefits associated with the particular behavior
what's the
or
benefit?
product. The perceived benefits, and maybe some real benefits, the perceived benefits of raw milk relative to pasteurized milk, there's a list, but probably the most important one that we hear frequently is that the pasteurization process, and to some extent the homogenization process that usually goes along with pasteurization, removes some of the nutrients, denatures proteins, maybe the perception at least that it decreases some of the protein value, destroys some vitamins. So that argument has been there for a long time. Other claims are that some people are intolerant to lactose, and there's the perception that raw milk is less likely to an individual is less likely to be intolerant to lactose in raw milk versus pasteurized milk. So it's largely about the nutritional factors that are believed to be better in raw milk, or conversely destroyed or decreased in pasteurized milk.
I want to kick off our conversation just by reading the last paragraph of something called the Manifesto for a Global Democracy, which Saskia Sassen signed along with some other fairly notable signatories, including Noam Chomsky. Here's how it goes. We ask every human being to participate in the constitution of a global democracy. Autonomy and self-determination are not only valid at the local and national level, that's why we champion the principle of the right to participate in the making of fundamental global decisions that directly affect our lives. We want to be citizens of the world and not its mere inhabitants. Therefore, we demand not just a local and national democracy, but also a global democracy. Okay, that's what we want to get into tonight. And Saskia, we'll start with you. What kinds of decisions, for example, are fundamental global decisions, in your view?
Well, I think a whole range of decisions, frankly. What has happened is a kind of capture at the top of not just expressing and commanding, but of making the logic. So in the name of rescuing the banks, all kinds of abuses have happened, including that citizens' money at the rate of 15 billion a month was paid for the past 2 years. So there is a kind of notion that we, the citizens, are sort of, we have forgotten how to make justice, how to make our citizenship, how to make rights. So I think that the notion is it's not the voting vector, having a voice via the vote. It is really the active making of democracy. And in a way, we really have become consumers of everything, including consumers of our citizenship. So the call is a call to make. Now, at what level, at what scale, that will vary according to whatever the issue at hand. And so now there are all kinds of, I'm sure we'll get into it, how do we communicate, how do we decide, what are majorities, what are minorities, et cetera, But I think the call is for us to become makers of our citizenship, makers of democracy, et cetera.
I'm just curious, one of the words you used in that answer was we have forgotten how to do democracy. How is it that we have forgotten to do it?
Because I think we have been rendered sort of a bit useless to the making of. We just consume. Voting is such a minimalist event. We need to know so little to vote, and we are bombarded with ideas. We don't have decision power. Why is it that the financial system can make enormous decisions as to what ought to be done, and the executive branch of government, the branch of government which in liberal democracy we the citizens have least standing, our standing really is with the legislative or with parliaments. So it is quite interesting to see that between the executive branch of government and dominant corporate sectors, with finance really, I always think of it as the steam engine of our epoch. It's everywhere, directly or indirectly. So those two critical, powerful actors, which is of course many individuals, many committees, many organizations, compose that, constitute that. They are making the decisions. The Federal Reserve has an inordinate power nowadays. This is the central bank, any central bank in any major country. I should have put it in those terms. An inordinate power to generate the policies that are good, in quotation marks, for the people. Where did we go wrong? There was a time when there were elements in society like strong trade unions, a lot of small credit unions. The banking function was widely distributed across, small entities that were constituted via the members. That is all gone. So now we really are consumers, and we are minimalist as consumers.
Don't our local, provincial, national governments already handle all of these things? This notion of we need some kind of global approach to democracy? Why? What's the answer?
Well, I guess I would disagree with that premise. That first of all, I would agree with Saskia that democracy as an aspiration is very much alive in the world. It's alive in all the movements that I'm aware of. However, those movements would not pose the problem as one of their own capabilities. They would pose the problem as one of power. That democracy, as we understand it, and how it's been institutionalized in the world, how it's being exercised, has been evacuated of any real content. And that the movements, for example, of the World Social Forum, which I've been tracking for the last decade, they practically universally call for greater democracy, but they're also very rigorous critics of the prevailing notion of democracy, which is liberal and representative, and which is exported around the world more often than ever at the end of a gun. And it's evacuated of any real choice because it's happening in the context of the Washington Consensus, which is, you know,
I agree completely.
Can I finish my point? Let me finish my point,
stand by.
please.
Let's go
that in the World Social Forum, for example, I would say there are at least three trajectories around democracy. One is a group that would call for global institutionalization of democracy in the way that this manifesto talks about it. In the World Social Forum, they're the minority. And I would say they're also identified with elite NGOs. By far the largest swath of movements in the World Social Forum advocate a strengthening of democracy at the national scale. That's necessary but insufficient, but that the nation state remains absolutely critical to the aspirations of these movements.
Critical or supreme?
No, critical, important, not only. A third major trajectory would be the autonomous movements, which I think were very prevalent in the Occupy movement worldwide. And these are, you know, young people, many of them anarchists, very strong critics of the nation state, which they understand as an authoritarian state, including our own. And these critics are trying to rebuild democracy in a different way, outside the state often, and at the local scale. So, you know, these are three major trajectories that are operating in the global justice movements. And they don't all agree, even though they all aspire to some kind of enriched participatory democracy.
Sounds like they're all competing with each other, though.
Well, they're in conversation. Let's put it that way. They're in conversation with each other.
I don't know anybody who thinks paparazzi is a good thing. So do I infer from your comment that Cyberazzy, in your view, is also a dangerous thing?
It can be a dangerous thing. You know, just like if you think about movie stars, they will use the paparazzi sometimes to their advantage to get good publicity, maybe a great table, you know, people are making a fuss about them. But then sometimes the paparazzi crosses the privacy line and they invade on people's privacy, you know, sort of like the princess when she was sunbathing, when she thought she was private, and they are taking photos that are inappropriate. So same thing with the internet. This Cyberazzy who's following you could actually benefit you and provide you with great deals, great information, lead you to making really good purchases. But at the same time, sometimes this Cyberazzy actually crosses that privacy line or the creep line and become actually creepy. And that's where you really have to be aware of what they're doing so that you can have a voice and either opt out or tell them you don't like when they've crossed that line.
Let's do one example here. There's a company called Axiom that apparently has profiles on hundreds of millions of consumers. They apparently have 1,500 different data points on average per profile. What do they know about us?
Oh, they know all kinds of things about you. And here's the crazy part. Do you remember actually making a purchase with Axiom or actually doing business with them?
I never heard of them.
Yeah, you've never heard of them, and that's the thing. All of the places that you're doing business, whether it's online or actually in brick and mortar stores, behind the scenes are selling this data. And they may not actually realize they're selling the data directly to Axiom. There may be a go-between. But Axiom has this insatiable appetite to collect this data and then repackage and resell the data to marketing companies, ad agencies, and other companies. And some of the things that they know about you are where you've been, at least where your device ID has been, the types of purchases that are attributed to some email accounts. Now, again, they'll say, well, we anonymize it. We don't actually know it's you. It's people like you. But the fact remains, in order to get to the demographics and to get to buying patterns and buying behaviors as well as location behaviors, at some point that data was about you. And one of the things that researchers found is an indicator of where you've been in a study actually helped them predict where you would be. And so that's one of the things that we all have to pay very close attention to.
There's 1 billion people on Facebook every month, and I wonder, because like most people, I don't check too carefully what the privacy agreements are, I wonder whether Facebook is selling my history, or anybody's history for that matter, to advertisers. What are they doing with it?
Well, and it's interesting. I actually wrote a Huffington Post article called Why My Husband Left Facebook, because one night I was reading the privacy policy out loud to myself, trying to make sense of it for our clients who use it from a corporate perspective. And that's when my husband made the decision to leave Facebook. One of the things that, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Google+, any of the other free social media and social networking accounts that I think everybody needs to walk away with is there is a product for sale, and that product is you.
Peter, I want to start with you. I'd like to know what the situation is like in Cochrane, and in particular, how the costs of policing have changed over the past decade.
Well, the costs of policing are dramatic in Cochrane, and it's no different than the most of the province. To be frank with you, in Cochrane, for example, policing costs have doubled in the past 5 years, and that doubling is equivalent to about a 25% tax hike in the community. And if we continue on this trend, in the next couple of years, our policing costs will have tripled. It is the single biggest cost that we're dealing with on our tax levy, and we started out 2 years ago with this being 50 cents, Steve, of every tax dollar collected in Cochrane. So it's dramatic. And I do want to frame, though, that the service is fabulous. We have no issue with the service. We think the service is second to none. It's a matter of recognizing the unsustainable nature of the cost and finding a way to deal with that.
Mayor Thompson, what's happened in your community?
Well, we're very lucky. We have two police forces. We have the OPP in the rural area and the municipal police force. Policing costs are a huge portion of our budget. They're continually to increase, and with our municipal force, we're always looking at ways to control that, reducing officers, etc. On the OPP side, it's really being very carefully on that contract and how many officers are allocated and how we can better manage it, because the costs are a huge portion of.
Explain this to me. Why do you have two police forces?
We are an amalgamated community. We have a fabulous small heritage downtown and urban area. We have a much larger rural area that was policed by the OPP, and a municipal force, a long-standing municipal force in the urban area, the former town. Once we amalgamated, the residents in the urban area loved their municipal police force. They're very passionate about their police. We have gone through 6 policing studies in 13 years. Each time it's recognized that there are savings that could be had if we went all OPP into an integrated police service. But the reality is people in the urban area loved their police, and they stood behind them, and they have, and they want to maintain that service.
So they're content to pay more in order to have the two different services.
They told us that during the policing debates. They were willing to pay more. At tax time, it's not quite
so much.
The same.
Is there a difference in the quality or level of service you get between the local force and the Ontario force?
They are both fabulous police forces, and the officers work together and share services. It's often thought you have more control with the municipal force. That's really not true. You work under the Police Services Act, and you manage accordingly under that act, and the same conditions apply. So, but we have different levels of service. The OPP provide us a rural level of service.
Which means what?
We have a farm community. It's much different than the urban center with downtown patrols, large commercial areas, those types of things. So it's a different type of policing in the urban area. I know the OPP do that type of service in other communities, but that's not what we have contract with them.
Okay. Rick Philbin, help us understand this. Why have policing costs gone up as much as they apparently have?
Well, I can speak on behalf of the OPP. The costs for policing have gone up over the past, say, decade, primarily because for OPP municipally policed locations, because we are mandated under the Police Service Act to recover the cost of actual policing for those municipalities. And since 2003, the contracts were established to recover the costs for policing, but the formulas failed to stay with current costs.
I don't know what you're saying. What are you saying?
What I'm saying is that we're billing for work in 2010 with 2003 costs.
Over the course of that 3.5 decades that you've been in policing, what are the biggest changes that you've seen in the way that it's been done?
Technology, for sure. I mean, when I first started, you had a ticket book, you had a notebook, and you had a flashlight. And really, that was it.
And a gun.
And a gun, yeah. But in terms of recording events and all of that, you had a pen and a piece of paper. Of course, the in-car computers, the roadside breath tests, and on, to the point where we've got cameras here and we've got cameras there, and the whole use of the internet and how that challenged us in many ways, but gave us solutions on how to do police work in many ways as well. That's probably been the biggest change, but there's been a ton of changes.
When everybody's got a cell phone, how much more difficult does that make the frontline cop's job?
In some respects, it makes it easier, and because people report things quicker. You can be there quicker, you can save lives quicker, and everybody's got a camera, so people are taking pictures for you all the time. Sometimes it's something you'd rather not see, but that's life, we'll deal with that in terms of our own behavior or our officers' behavior at times. So it's really helped us, but it's caused maybe 1,000 calls to go into our comm center over a small collision on Highway 400, and we used to maybe get one when the guy eventually got to a payphone. And now you get thousands of them. So sorting out where is it, which one is it the same call over and over again, and dispatching officers here and there to find out it's one and nobody's hurt. Some of those are challenges. The ability to communicate really is a benefit more than it is in my view, more than it is a challenge.
Okay, but that's your view as the commissioner of the OPP. Do you think the frontline man or woman on the force feels a little, not to mix my metaphors here, but a little under the gun today because these cameras are everywhere?
They are, but I mean, they for the most part, they're filming and taking photographs of officers doing the right thing. So there's some protection in that. When someone says they did X or Y and they didn't, and someone's got a video clip of it, that's a good thing. And they should be professional, and they should be doing their job properly. And if someone gets a picture of something that maybe is evidentiary that will help us solve a case or prevent someone from being victimized, then that's a good thing too. So you take the good with the bad, and I think there's more good around that than there is bad, and I think even our front line would agree.
There is, I think it's fair to say, less respect among the public for politicians, journalists, car salesmen, I mean, you name it. There's a less respect for everybody out there. Police officers too, do you think?
And to some degree. I think when something goes bad, it taints the whole police community. And that could be in LA, could be in New York City. But everyone just associates it with policing. If someone goes bad in the OPP, Toronto police will get accused, oh, you're one of those guys that did it, whatever.
People don't make the distinction among
Not
the forces.
often. And then sometimes, we've got 9,000 people in total in the OPP. At some point, one of those people is going to do the wrong thing. And how that's handled in the media and whatnot from there may taint the view of some people, and it may reduce their confidence in the police. And that's sad, but it's something we have to deal with. So we always have to be trying to do the best we can and do many, many good things, knowing that the odd bad thing will happen.
We've actually had you on this program before talking about the stress-related injuries and accidents and illnesses that frontline officers have to deal with. Do the police do a better job or a worse job today acknowledging the stresses that come with the job and how to treat them?
We do a way better job than we did.
You're sure about that?
I'm very sure about that. I mean, the Ombudsman report really opened my eyes. I knew we were doing a lot of great things, and I didn't think we had that many people hurting. I found out there was lots of things we still weren't doing, and we had way more people hurting than I ever imagined. And the biggest thing that came out of that was the fact that it really opened my eyes, and many of our senior people, to the fact that many people, whether they be supervisors, managers, or frontline officers, still had this attitude, suck it up. You're a police officer, get back out on the road. So you shot somebody, so you saw a dead child at a collision scene, and we're human beings. And so that suck it up attitude has to go.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review. You can see all of those programs in their entirety if you want to. They're on our website, theagenda.tvo.org, on our iTunes channel, and on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.